all the committee members who are present, either in the chamber or online, at the point that you make your first, you ask your first question, if you could please just introduce yourself, that would be really very helpful, and I think it will help residents to know who you are as you're speaking. Thank you very much. I also thank Councillor McConnell for standing in at short notice for Councillor Crook. And also, I understand Councillor Bond is currently not able to make the meeting, but she might be able to join us as the meeting moves forward. So that would be good to know. Could I also welcome to his first meeting Councillor Newell, and it's very good to have you joining the committee. Thank you for that. I hope you find it as interesting as I know many of us do in terms of the information and the reports that we have the privilege to look at and to scrutinise. May I also just say thank you to Councillor Webb, who I notice is also with us on screen. Thank you very much, Councillor Webb. Can I call you Anne for the purpose of this, Anne, for being on the committee and being an active member of the committee in the past, and it's been very much appreciated. So thank you very much for your work on that. So we're going to move on, first of all, then, to declarations of interest, if there are any. I'm not aware that we have received any. I see none. We'll move on to the public open forum. Robert, have we received any?
No one today, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry, I skipped that. Apologies for absence, because I think I've already covered that in the earlier comments. Moving on to then item 4, we've got two principal items on the agenda today. They're both very much finance items in the way they're reported. But for any resident or any business or anybody at all who might be watching out there, there's a lot more than numbers behind this. This is all about the services that are provided by Monmouthshire County Council, income that's generated by Monmouthshire County Council. So it's what lies behind the numbers, I think, that they'll be of most interest to committee members. But may I start by welcoming Councillor Callard, who's the Cabinet member, and welcome Councillor Callard to the meeting. Thank you for joining us. And may I hand over to you, first of all, to look at item number 4 and introduce the revenue and capital budget proposals, where we're going to scrutinise the 2025-2026 draft revenue and capital budget proposals. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And apologies I can't be in the chamber with you today. I'm a little bit under the weather, so I might speak a little bit less than I normally do today, and maybe let some of the officers do a little bit more of that lifting. But if it's okay with you, I'll present a slightly condensed version of the budget consultation presentation. I know many of you will probably have seen it already. So I'm going to take the top points and what I think are the most informative slides through that presentation. So I'll bring that up on my screen if that's okay, and spend the next 10, 15, 20 minutes talking through it, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Callan. That would be perfect. And thanks for joining us if you're feeling under the weather as well. We'll make some allowance for that, shall we, Councillor Callan?
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so there we go. So moving into our budget for the next financial year, I've built this budget mainly around the principles, some of which you'll find in our community and corporate plan, but they are broadly speaking planning for the future, protecting the most vulnerable in our society, being a financially responsible council, reducing inequalities, and protecting our environment. You can see here in this pie chart how the breakdown of our revenue budget goes to our various services. And I think there's a couple of points worth making here. One of those is that when we look at our revenue budget, there's £216 million. There's actually a lot of spending that the authority does outside of this through grant funding, which probably adds at least another £100 million onto our kind of spending that the authority does, but those things sit outside of our revenue budget. So we have quite a lot of provision of services, which is done through grant funding. But when we look at our revenue budget, we can see that over 2/3 of the budget is built up with our education spending in our Learning Skills and Economy Directorate of 33% and our Social Care and Health Directorate spend of 35%. And I know members of the committee will be aware that we talk a lot about the pressures in social care and health in this committee. And really, I think we're seeing that in this trend that for the first time, social care and health spending has outstripped that of education. And really, it's been a long time coming, but we've finally kind of broken that threshold where the demand and the costs associated with providing social care and health has outstripped that of providing education to the learners in our county. You can also see that a lot of the services which our residents will naturally associate with council spending make up a smaller proportion of our revenue budget. So our waste collection services, our transport services, our Mon Life directorate, with our leisure centres and our heritage attractions where we run those, they make up a much smaller proportion of our overall spend. So as we go into the next financial year, to continue to provide the same services that we have provided throughout financial year 2024-2025 will cost an additional £23.7 million. And on the left here in these pair of stacked bar charts, you can see where that £23.7 million is built. It is constructed of recurrent service demand and inflation, pay inflation, new service demand, which we forecast into the next year, the increase in national insurance contributions that we have to make, non-pay inflation, our borrowing and central costs, additional investment in schools of £1 million, and unwinding one-off reserve usage. On the right-hand side, you can see how we propose to bridge that gap within our draft budget proposals. And they include our proposed council tax increase of 7.8%, which raises £5.9 million of revenue. Our grant increase from Welsh Government of 2.6%, which raises an additional £5.1 million. The service savings within our directorate, and I'll come on to those in just a moment, that raises an additional £5.1 million. The funding that will be forthcoming to cover off our rise in national insurance contributions, £3.3 million, and you can see that nets off against the other side. A reduction in our energy costs, an increase in our fees and charges, and then at the top there you can see that there is a gap still of £2.9 million, well, £2.86 million that we are taking from our draft budget and which we will close by the time of our final budget. And this gap really illustrates that we don't feel that our increase in grant from Welsh Government was sufficient, and we have been negotiating with them to increase that. We are talking about putting a funding floor in place, and what that will mean is the worst funded councils in Wales will get an uplift to bring them closer to the average. And as you'll know, Monmouthshire came bottom of the Welsh Government funding this year in terms of percentage increase in our grant from Welsh Government, so it would have the biggest effect on us as a local authority. So we've got £10.9 million of service cost pressures and investment planned within this budget. You can see there the big ticket item really of social care demand and inflation, which we know has been a severe pressure on our budget over the past few years. That is predicted to continue into the next financial year. We are increasing our foster care allowances so we can get a better balance between the foster care that we can provide through Monmouthshire and also other providers in the area, which will have two effects. One of those is to rightfully reward the time and the energy and the patience that our foster carers put in providing what is an essential service in looking after the vulnerable people within our county, but also to encourage more foster carers to come and foster with Monmouthshire, because every time someone chooses to foster with Monmouthshire rather than with an agency or a different local authority, it saves us money. So we're expecting over time that cost pressure will net out to zero due to the savings associated with it. There's an additional £1 million investment in schools, £700,000 investment in children with additional learning needs, and also £300,000 in specialist education resource bases. We've got cost pressure within our home to school transport and within our own transport and fleet of £800,000 combined, and then also some shortfall in income from our Mon Life Directorate. So going into the next financial year, I mentioned the cost of our services, providing the same services, increases by £23.7 million. In our draft budget, we're proposing income increases of £15 million, which includes our government grant, national insurance funding, council tax, and our charges. We're expecting a reduction in our energy costs, and we are not proposing to use any of our revenue reserves to support this budget. That leaves a balance of £8 million. Now, we're proposing within our draft budget service savings proposals of £5.1 million. And as I mentioned earlier, this leaves a gap of £2.86 million, which will need to be closed by the time we present the final budget. And as I said, we're in negotiations with Welsh Government in order to increase our funding. Now, we're not expecting the funding from Welsh Government, increase in funding, to completely close out this gap. But we do have a number of potential other positive, income streams or a reduction in pressure within our services, which are being developed at the moment. So at this point in time, I'm confident that we won't have to go back to our services to make further savings within our services. So as we go through our directorates one by one, I will go through the service savings proposals in each directorate. Within our learning skills and economy directorate, we will be increasing that budget in this draft budget by 10.7%. That includes savings within our Monmouthshire specialist teachers team. We currently have a part-time vacancy due to a retirement, and we're looking to formalise that vacancy. We're looking to move some core staffing costs over to grant funding. We're looking to bring Monmouthshire pupils with additional learning needs who are currently educated outside of Monmouthshire back into Monmouthshire provision at key points during their education transition. So we won't move any pupils during the middle of a school year, middle of a school term. It'll be where they have natural points of transition within their educational pathway, and where it is viable to do so, we shall bring them into the into Monmouthshire County Council provision. We're also looking to fund the transformational costs of integrating changes to our specialist resource bases and the digital rollout in schools from capital receipts. And we're also expecting a reduction in school maintenance costs as a result of the brand new school, which will shortly be opened in Abergavenny. Within our social care budget, we are proposing to increase that budget by 10.6% next year. That's as a response to the pressure that we're seeing within adult social care, but we also need to continue a lot of the work that we're doing in our adult social care directorate to try and ease that pressure on the budget. I'm pleased that my colleague, Councillor Ian Chandler, is here today, and I'm sure Ian will be happy to talk a bit further about what's going on within our social care directorate. But the service savings proposed there are both within adults and children's a continuation of the practice change that we're working through within those care services to try and make sure that we're delivering the best value for money. Within adult social care, we're looking to consolidate existing vacancies within our home care teams to bring forward a saving. And councillors will be aware that we're currently in the process of, where possible, acquiring properties within Monmouthshire in order to bring some of our children's services back in-house. Cabinet made a decision on a recent acquisition in Abergavenny. I think it was earlier this year in January. We have a part-time staff vacancy within our community meals service that we're looking to formalise. And within social care and health, the fees and charges that are levied on some services, we'll be looking to increase those. Also within our public health trading standards and registrar areas. And in public protection, we're proposing the removal of the head of public protection post with a review of the longer term arrangements within that team to make sure that this key area of the council services enable it to continue to function effectively, but also for savings to be taken forward within the next financial year. Our infrastructure and place budget is proposed to increase by 9.7% next year, so just under 10%. However, we are going to need to make savings within this directorate as well, and these include an increase in planning application fees, increases in car parking fees, building control application fees, and home to school discretionary transport fees, and also to introduce an annual membership fee of £10 for grassroots users. Within home to school transport, which for reasons unknown to me sits outside of our education portfolio, but inside our infrastructure and place portfolio. So home to school transport, Cabinet took a decision back in the autumn of 2024 to revert to statutory distances of 2 miles for primary and 3 miles for secondary, whereby one is eligible for free transport to school, and that brings forward a saving of £447,000. We have restructured our senior management team, which brings forward savings of £170,000. And also within our homelessness department, we are looking to reduce our spend there by reducing our use of bed and breakfasts and, where possible, utilising council assets. And in this specific case, it relates to the old Seven View care home being brought back into use to act as temporary housing for those who find themselves homeless, and as a transition into helping those people find more permanent accommodation. It also means that we should be able to wrap around other council services to increase the support we can give these people and help them hopefully stay in successfully transition into permanent accommodation. We're looking to increase income from grants in building cleaning, youth enterprise and highways external works. We're looking to reduce our gritter fleet by extending the working hours of the current vehicles that we have, and also to undertake an energy audit to identify potential savings within our spend on energy. On life budget, we are proposing to increase it by 3.7% next year, with the following savings being brought forward. That is a service redesign at the Borough Theatre in order to better optimise the use of space there, which will bring forward savings of £50,000. Realigning the opening hours of our 4 central hubs. These are the hubs within Chepstow, Caldicot, Monmouth and Abergavenny. Altering the operating model of our youth service to focus it on the 4 main towns in the county. To increase income within our leisure centres to £150,000. Sorry, not to £150,000, an increase of £150,000. We're also proposing to review the operating model for Old Station Tinton, which will, at the end of the 2025 season, so there'll be no changes for the 2025 summer season. But after that, we'll conduct an options appraisal to assess which is the best way to make sure that service continues to operate, but also is the most viable and reduces the burden on the local authority. That could include a change in the way that we deliver the service there, a lease of the site, or potential sale of the site. We're also looking to review the waste collection contracts for our markets to further develop the management structure of MonLife to bring forward additional savings, and also recharge officer time where possible into capital schemes for rights of way and Section 106 work. Our people, performance and partnerships budget next year is proposed to increase by 4.3% with the following savings. That is mainly driven by technology and automation. So within our Welsh translation service, we're proposing to use AI to support us in our Welsh translation. It should allow our Welsh translation capacity to increase, and we can really focus our translators on making sure that the quality is there after technology can do the legwork of the translation. Also further automation within our systems and payroll department, and implementing an apprentice-first approach within our workforce and reducing the authority's subscriptions where possible. In our resources budget, we are proposing a budget increase of 1.9%, but also with the following savings. We're looking to cease our cybersecurity insurance provision. We think it represents particularly poor value for money. We are looking to have a management restructure within our ICT, Digital Design and Innovation department, which will remove a head of service post, and also to reduce the administration support in Chief Officer Admin support of 1.6 full-time equivalent. I mentioned earlier that council tax in our draft budget is proposed to increase by 7.8%. You can see what this means in this slide for each of the different bands. On a band D property, it equates to just under £11 extra per month. And you would have seen from the earlier slide that this provides £5.9 million of much needed funding to support our services. And also for those who may struggle to afford their council tax, there are schemes in place to help people pay their council tax, whether they be on low incomes or be a single person or have students in the house. So, and this committee is well aware of this. Our budgets carry risks every year. The demand on the local authority fluctuates. We have seen historically our social care spend outstrip our forecasted demand. We know that we carry these risks also with regards to pay awards. These are not negotiated with the local authority. These are negotiated nationally, and then it falls on the local authority to fund them. So we are a passenger to some of these events, but we are bound to pay for them. We use the best information that we have at the time of setting the budget in order to make the most accurate estimates that we can of the value of some of these things. And you would have seen that we are baking in a considerable increase in the cost of providing social care and health for the next year. And also the national insurance contributions, the employers' national insurance contributions increase we've seen. We don't yet know how much of an impact that will have from our indirect workforce, so those which we contract out. So again, we've taken the best estimate that we can at this point in time. And also, I mentioned earlier about the level of grants that Monmouthshire receives. That again, there's risk around that about how grants will transpire throughout the year and how services will, the funding of those services, may fall in the balance between revenue funding and grant funding. So our capital programme, which oversees the maintenance and enhancements of the local authority's assets, we're going to continue to support the council priorities in the community and corporate plan, and also invest a further £2.3 million towards our key infrastructure. which is predominantly highway structures, carriageways, flood alleviation, footpaths, public rights of way, and our property estate. And this is much needed investment into these services, because we all know that there is a significant backlog of work, within the infrastructure across the authority. So we are currently in the middle of our budget consultation. It will run until the 22nd of February, I believe. We are holding a number of public sessions, both online and in person, as well as going out and speaking to specific groups who use our services, such as schools and care leavers. That's taking place now, and I would encourage all members of the council and all members of the public to take part, to provide your feedback, because the budget becomes a better budget when we have greater level of input into it and greater levels of feedback. So thank you, Chair. That's the end of the presentation, and I will stop sharing my screen, and I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard, and it came across quite clearly at this end in terms of the screen, so thank you for that. And I'm going to open actually, before I do that, I'll just ask Jonathan if you had anything you wanted to add to the Cabinet members' comments. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Jonathan Davis, Head of Finance. I think, Chair, Councillor Callard's covered off everything quite eloquently, and I think the areas I would touch upon, I'm probably aware that members will have questions on, so I think we may be better going straight into those questions, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you, John. Yeah, we will do. And I see Councillor Buckler, you have your hand up first. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Callard. Very sort of full breakdown of the budget machinations, which are always very essential every year and tricky to accomplish. Bearing in mind that what you did say. I think it was in this scrutiny committee that there wouldn't be any changes to sort of frontline services like libraries and hubs, and the fact that it became apparent that there was going to be the option of shifting the Monmouth Library to a sort of less suitable place. Can you just let us know if there are any other frontline services being considered for curtailing or closure? And you also that there'll be a gap in the between additional funding you expect to close the gap with the budget. Sorry, I've got a very annoying dog in my corner here, which is just being removed. The gap in the budget, which you expect to be partly filled by the Welsh funding, sort of bringing up the funding by the Welsh government, but you know there will be a gap in that. How do you expect that to be filled? We've been told there will be no redundancies. That was the first thing we were, the headline really was that there'll be no redundancies. But if there are changes in frontline services, what difference will that make to redundancies, and how does that tie in with the proposed, the gap that you need to fill? We did this remarkable visit to the King Henry School, which you mentioned, which is absolutely fantastic. It's a beacon of innovation, and it'll be such a bonus to children and young people who go there. It's absolutely fantastic, and it's the first carbon neutral school in Wales, and it's something to be incredibly proud of. We were absolutely astounded at sort of something that had started 7 years ago has produced the most amazing result. It'll be a real moment of achievement when it's opened in April.
Councillor Butler, have you got a question about?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, sorry. I apologise for that, but
your enthusiasm about the school is very, very understandable. But just if you have a question, thank you.
Yeah, curtail myself. You're quite right. But I want to know because the different, bearing in mind there's this great gap in the education budget, are there going to be effects on the teaching staff? Are we going to be seeing redundancies in the teaching staff? I mean, I note that in sixth form there was, that languages, there is a shift to not offering so many foreign languages. And I just wonder, how we're going to tackle that, because it's, to broaden young people's education must be the key to a brighter future for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. And Councillor Callagher, did you want to start? And if you need to, obviously, I'm sure you'll pass to John.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the questions, Councillor Buckler. Firstly, your question about the hubs and the libraries, there's no proposal to move Monmouth Library. Monmouth Library will be staying where it is. And there's no proposal to move any of our hubs or close down any of our hubs. The proposal is to make adjustments to the hubs' opening hours in order to generate a revenue saving while providing minimal disruption to the services that are offered there. On your question about, you mentioned that no redundancies was really the headline of this budget, and I think I question that assertion. It's not been a headline that I've gone out with this budget, and I'm not sure that we are avoiding any redundancies with this budget. I might bring in Jonathan Davis in time to talk a bit further on that shortly. And you also went on to talk about the new King Henry VIII School and the pressure within our schools funding. We're aware that there's pressure within our schools funding. It's probably something we'll come on to talk about when we go through month 9 as well as the next agenda item. But in this budget, not only are we fully funding the teachers' pay award, teachers' pension costs, schools' national insurance contributions, but we're also putting an additional £1 million into our schools in order that we can, support them bringing attendance levels back up post-COVID, and also to, help them provide, the best education they can for our children. And, I certainly share your enthusiasm for the new school in King Henry. I went to King Henry School, and I remember visiting it. One of the first things I did as a councillor, actually, during the planning process, and it hadn't changed much since I'd been there. So a new school is sorely needed. I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to it coming and open. But John, did you want to come in briefly and just cover off that redundancy question? Or I know we've got Matt Gatehouse here as well.
Good morning, everyone. Matthew Gatehouse, Chief Officer People Performance and Partnerships. Yes, just to pick up on the redundancy question, we can't be explicit at this point that there are no redundancies. What I would say is, in terms of all of the modelling and the work that has been done to date, the number of any potential redundancies would be at the very low end. And by that, I'll just, for now, say that would be below the threshold of 20 that would signal the expectation of collective consultation under the Trade Union and Labour Relations Consolidation Act. I think at the moment, the numbers we'd be looking at would be certainly countable on the fingers of two hands, and there is still work to be done on that at the moment.
Yeah, just before John comes in on that, I think Councillor Buckler was referring to what has been previously referred to as a statement by the leader in a discussion that was recorded and televised at the Welsh Government that said that they would not be having redundancies, which is, I imagine, Councillor Buckler, where you're picking that up from. But the question I think you were asking was, what about the frontline services, other frontline services? So what about schools? What about social care? If that is the approach that the Council's taking, broadly no redundancies, are we are we making that clear to the frontline services for whom we're also responsible, either directly in schools or indirectly in one form or another in social care? But yeah, I think that was the question that Councillor Buckler, if I'm not over-interpreting it, you were asking about.
It was. Thank you, Chair. Yes, and thank you for clarifying my thoughts, which were a bit distracted, as you know. But thank you. Yeah.
Yes, I don't know who wants to pick that up, but I think that was the question. The other one that hasn't been addressed is the budget gap and how that's likely to be filled. Are there any, what will happen with the budget gap? Yeah, Matthew.
So if I can just come back in initially, Chair, on the point of the redundancies to clarify that, and it may be that others choose to or are able to come in and supplement with a bit more detail. One of the things we've been really focused on as an authority over the last 5, 6, 7 months is using natural turnover within services to keep jobs vacant where we felt there would be a future need to make savings, and that's included contributing to the in-year budget pressure, all of which, as you know, as a committee, makes a big difference in terms of budget setting the next year. So an area like social care and health, which Councillor Chandler is responsible for, they've been managing the vacancies effectively. So while there may be a reduction in staffing budgets as a result of this, the effect of holding those posts vacant has allowed them to be managed gradually over time, minimising or completely taking out the need for any compulsory redundancies in that service area. If I just sort of quickly mention sort of one other area, and it might be something that sort of Will McLean or Nikki Wellington may need to add to, would be around what happens in schools, because the council sets budgets for education, but the decisions around staffing within schools are taken by individual governing bodies. So it wouldn't be appropriate to me to comment or sort of second guess what may happen in governing bodies at a future date. But in terms of our own frontline service delivery, any redundancies would be very much a minimum, and we are incredibly optimistic that those can be managed by the process we've deployed to date in terms of keeping posts vacant.
Thank you, Matthew. John, I think you've been trying to come in, and just wondered if there was anything you wanted to add to that.
Thanks, Jay. It was probably specifically about the budget gap question, which I don't mind covering off, Councillor Callard, to save your voice this morning, but I think it's probably important just to reflect that this was a draft budget that was produced ready to go out early January. Things change over time, and there'll be lots of things that will play into final budget considerations that come forward at the end of February, early March. A lot of that is around our funding. It will be both the core grant that we get from Welsh Government that we've talked about, and Councillor Callard mentioned the potential for any funding floor. That will be part of the consideration, but there's lots of other things in play as well around specific grants that we will have to bring in and make accommodation for. So it is a very dynamic situation. It probably changes day by day. I think what Councillor Callard's committed to is that we won't see any significant changes to services that will be brought forward as part of the final budget considerations. And there's a good reason for that. We didn't want to go out on consultation with something that would shift considerably, and I think that was important. So I think there's very little that we could add to this morning. It's a very live conversation with Welsh Government around the funding floor. We will continue to negotiate both through political means with Councillor Callard and the leader, but also in the background through our officer channels and through the Welsh Local Government Association. So work ongoing. We're optimistic at this point that we'll see a good outcome on that, and that will cover a significant proportion of our remaining budget gap. So hopefully that gives a little bit more context, Councillor Buckler.
Thank you, John. And Councillor Buckler, are you content with that? Any other questions to follow?
No, thank you very much, both Councillor Callard and Jonathan. That's very helpful. Just, you know, we just know how important it is that we tell our residents as much as we can, so that that they all know the difficulties we deal with. Thank you.
Can I just add, and Jonathan, it might be something that you can help with, but I think Councillor Callard mentioned that we're in the process of trying to estimate what the impact is. We don't know what the impact on national insurance, changes to national minimum wage salary, and for our indirect employees in social care. And I'm trying to understand why that would be, because we know how many are employed in delivering the social care, and we know how much those changes are. So I'm trying to understand why there would be any significant amount of uncertainty in that. I don't know if you could clarify.
Thank you, Chair. So I think, yeah, it's important to get the clarification firstly between what we deem direct and indirect. So the direct impact for us will be staff that are directly employed by the local authority. We know the contracts that those people are on. We know pretty accurately how much our increased cost will be in terms of our national insurance contributions and those changes to national minimum wage and real living wage as well. So we're pretty set on that. The uncertainty is probably around whether that will attract full funding, both down through UK government and through the Welsh government mechanisms and allocations of that funding. We won't know that until after the budget has been set in March. So that's a key risk that we carry into the budget, along with many others. When we talk about the indirect impact, that is the potential uplift in cost that we may see through commissioned services. So you'll appreciate that probably our biggest commissioned service is around care, and many of those care providers will be seeing additional national insurance contributions as well. What we don't know at the moment is how much of that will be looked to be passported on to the end user by those providers, and that's quite a complex situation to gauge and to understand. So there'll be varying structures that those providers have in place through their business models. The size will impact the impact they see from additional national insurance contributions. Their ability to attract reliefs is dependent on their size and structures of their business. And ultimately, it will be how much they look to passport on to us as that end user of the service. So lots of complications sitting within that. We have good relationships with our providers. We've spoken to them, and we've been able to model a pressure that we've included within the draft budget for that. But again, it sits as a risk. That isn't our only commission service. We have others within transport, within school supply, teaching. So there are other considerations for us. But we probably go into this final budget now without having certainty over our position, and we will need to take that in and consider whether we're happy with that risk as we go into the final budget.
Okay, thanks, John. Over to Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chair, and Councillor Callard. Very good to see, both in the documents and in your comments this morning, Ben, that all our hubs are remaining open. Nevertheless, we are facing some reduction in opening hours. Now, I appreciate that's probably a more complicated piece of work than it seems, because the different hubs have different opening hours. They offer different levels of service and different patterns of demand. Nevertheless, we have the bottom line. The saving we're looking for is 110,000. Are we in a position to give some sort of ballpark figure as to how many hours in total we might need to reduce the hub opening hours? I'm not even looking for different figures for different hubs, but just a sort of a general percentage or something like this. Are we in a position at this stage to give some indication? Because at the moment it doesn't actually mean very much without a figure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. And Councillor Callard, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Strong. I think that's a good question, and it was also raised at Place Scrutiny Committee last Thursday. I'm happy to hand over to Ian Saunders, who I believe is in the chamber, to hopefully provide a little bit more information around that.
Ian, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, good morning. Ian Saunders, Chief Officer, Customer Culture and Wellbeing. Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Strong. The mandate at the moment is, the proposal is based around closing some hours off. Roughly that equates to around 35 hours in real terms. However, what you suggested in your question around the complications of the various opening hours across the hubs, the biggest complication is the data that we need to collect to make sure that the hours are suitable for the people that are using the service. So over the next couple of months, we're proposing that we do an extensive piece of work around data, capturing user feedback as well, and staff feedback around the modelling of our hubs. Our 4 hubs are extensively used. We know there's different setups in different towns, so some include a library and a hub in one building, and in Abergavenny you've got 2 buildings for that. So it isn't straightforward, and on top of that there's service changes such as the waste enhancements, which means people aren't going in so much at certain times for bags and things like that. So it's a complex mandate, but as it stands here, the proposal would look to take up to 35 hours out of the whole structure of hub opening hours.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Strong, did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, thanks. Just to make sure I've understood that. So we're modelling something like 35 hours per week spread across the 4 hubs. Yeah, is that a correct understanding of that?
Ian?
Yeah, so it equates to roughly a day provision a week.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I think residents are going to want to know that sort of order of magnitude as we go into the new financial year. Thank you. I'm moving on to Councillor Newell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Callard, as well for your presentation. This is my first meeting, so I'm learning on the job, so to speak. And just a quick point. I see that Mr. Saunders is in the chamber. Can I personally thank him for attending recent meetings with Friends of Monmouth Library and engaging with my residents in my ward? I'm County Councillor for Monmouth Town Ward. So on a personal note, if I could thank Mr. Saunders before I go to my question. Just making a few notes here, Councillor Callard, if I can ask a question through the chair. There will be a £2.9 million shortfall in the budget. Okay. And in layman terms, can we have a detailed update on how those negotiations are going with the Welsh Government for our uplift in our grant? What happens if we don't get the grant? And what do you think that's going to mean for our residents and their council tax bills? But Councillor Callard, as well, in his excellent presentation, also mentioned there are extra income streams. So if we were lucky enough to get the full 2.9 million that we need, could we still utilise those extra income streams? I hope that makes sense. And again, well done on your presentation.
Thank you. And Councillor Callard, did you want to come in on those questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question, Councillor Newell. Councillor Newell, sorry, and welcome to your first meeting of Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee. I think the question on the gap has been answered, by Jonathan Davis slightly earlier on in terms of the options we've got to close that. As I mentioned, we're not expecting a funding floor to completely close off that gap. So we will need to draw on other areas of income, and that's likely to fall around demand within our services and also potentially additional grant income. You'll know that the authority has significant pressure in many of its services and also quite low levels of reserves. So I think if there was, if we came towards our final budget with a little bit of headroom, then we have got, I suppose, a number of areas which will be first in the line to receive any additional funding. You can see across our savings proposals that I went through in the presentation that while there's many things in there which are, a good way to conduct business, things that we would be doing regardless of our funding situation, there's things in there which obviously, if we had more funding available, that we potentially wouldn't do. And there's also, as I mentioned, our reasonably low levels of reserves, which we've committed to in our medium-term financial strategy to try and bolster our reserve position. So there's a number, I would say, of calls on any headroom that we may or may not have coming between draft and final budget.
Just trying to understand that a little bit, if I may. So if the gap is not fully filled, I think you mentioned by whatever potential there is for a funding floor from the Welsh Government, and you've been really clear about that not being anticipated to fill the gap. You mentioned income being how we would fill that.
Sorry, Chair, if it's okay, I'll expand on that a little bit. Specifically with regards to additional income, here I'm referring to additional grant income. It may fall into one big pot called funding from Welsh Government, but there's a number of different streams and a number of different programmes which are funded from grants rather than from a core grant. And so how these play out in the funding allocated to those over this month will impact on that gap. And while the floor is one aspect of that, there is also additional opportunity within the grant space from Welsh Government, which will also contribute to reducing that gap, we hope closing it out.
So just again, and thank you. I appreciate that they're having a degree of a gap is not entirely new. It's just a concern that, clearly when we're in a sequence of years where there is overspending carrying forward, that's always a concern. But is there any intention to close whatever gap there is by an additional increase to the proposed council tax against that?
It's my hope that we won't have to go any further on council tax to close the gap. I would say that at this point, it would be irresponsible of me to completely rule it out, but I am not expecting us to have to go any further on council tax to our final budget.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Newell, did you want to follow up on any aspect of that, or of your question?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Callard. Yeah, it was just to say that it was just a very quick answer to the question that if we did get all of our funding that we needed, are we still able to apply for those extra grants, or are those grants conditional on us not getting our full or any extra money from the Welsh Government? Is there criteria that we need to meet to get these extra grants, or is it something we can go for in addition to this extra money we're asking for the Welsh Government?
There is criteria needed in order to get the grants, but the criteria is not, do you have enough money already? So, us having a funding gap or not having a funding gap does not alter our eligibility for any grant funding.
Councillor Newell?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Callard, for your answers. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. And over to Councillor Howells.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ben and Jonathan, for your presentations there. Thank you. I'm pleased to see that there's a £300,000 investment in the foster care service to retain and recruit carers, which also acknowledges their essential role in supporting vulnerable children. Will this be a direct payment to the families as an increase to what's already paid to them on a weekly or monthly basis? And will the investment see savings in payments to foster care agencies with successful recruitment, and what would those savings be per individual in the difference between annual cost of an agency and a foster family, which obviously has a better outcome socially for a child? My second question is, we are now, of course, mid-consultation, and note that the strategy there are strategies in place to engage with residents and stakeholders during the consultation period, which ends on the 22nd of February. Do we have an update on how successful the consultation has been so far? And as councillors, can we do any more to promote that consultation? And how will the feedback influence the final budget proposals? Just those two. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Howells. And Councillor Callard, did you want to pick that up?
On foster care fees, I wondered if Councillor Chandler, if you might want to come on that, seeing if it covers your portfolio.
Great, thank you. And perhaps we come back on the consultation and how it's going after that. So, yes, Councillor Chandler.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Chandler. I'm Ian Chandler, the Cabinet Member for Social Care, Safeguarding and Accessible Health Services. So thanks for the question, Councillor Howells, concerning the foster care fees. Our proposal that we will need to take through is to increase both the allowances that we pay for foster carers and the fee element. So the allowances is basically based on the cost of actually looking after the child, and it's a fairly standard figure, which we will be looking to enhance and bring that in line with our neighbouring authorities. In terms of the fees, that's slightly different. So we pay different levels of fees according to the training and skills that the foster families have been able to demonstrate. We're trying to encourage foster families to go through more training, to be better foster parents, to be able to deal with and look after the children looked after as best we can. We're looking to raise those fee levels quite substantially, and they're paid in accordance to the number of children they're looking after, and as I said, the fee level that they've attained. Yeah, it does get paid directly to them. How does that compare with the independent agencies? What it will do for those foster parents who are on the highest level of fees, and with the allowances that we pay alongside the fees, is getting very close and comparable to actually the amount of money that they would be receiving from an independent agency. It's always hard to predict that because obviously the independent fostering agencies are quite keep a lot of that information confidential, but from what we've been able to gather, foster parents should be getting a comparable amount of money. Of course, that does still represent a significant saving to the council, because we don't just pay, we also pay the foster agencies a significant amount of money on top of that, and we'll be saving that. So any foster parents that transfer from an agency to us, or new foster parents that we manage to recruit so that we're less dependent on the independent agencies, will represent a significant saving. But we don't anticipate that saving being achieved straight away, because it will take time for that to go through the service. That's why we see it as a cost pressure for this forthcoming year, and depending on how that pans out, we hope to see a subsequent saving in subsequent years.
When you refer to the increases, Councillor Chandler, as being raised quite substantially, can you be a little bit more accurate than, because that's a wide range, without necessarily a decimal point? Can you give a more accurate understanding of what that means? please?
It varies according to the level of fee that we're paying, but if I was to say that the fees in some cases could be doubled, that wouldn't be out of line. I'm not saying that every case it will be doubled, but in some instances fees could be doubled. Less. For many parents, though, it would be less of an increase than that. We can go through. I could go through the details, but we're transitioning from one system to another, so it's not quite a straightforward percentage increase. We've changed the structure of the fee structure that we're delivering on. So I hope that's an adequate answer.
Which are laid out in quite considerable detail in the relevant mandate, and at the moment our level 1 figures, level 1, 2, 3 figures are £61, level 1, 72, level 2, and 92, level 3 per week. And in the option that we're looking at, I think we're changing those to 100, 150, and 200. So it is quite a rise in terms of the fees, and then the adjustments that we're making to the allowances on top of that as well. But the details are fully represented in the mandate if you want to have a further look in. Yeah, thank you.
It's a really important question. It's a really interesting answer, and also the nature of it. Given the increase, are we making a major effort in connecting with that to attract foster care? Can we do more? I think the question that Councillor Howes was also asking, can we do more as councillors, and if so, how could we go about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're part of Foster Wales, and we collaborate on that. We've run a fairly regular recruitment campaigns and promotion campaigns to recruit more foster carers. So they go out on our social media channels. We also do face-to-face exercises at our hubs and other public venues to try and engage with people. So yes, if elected members were able to share and promote some of the promotional materials that we put out on social media, as well as when they're just talking to people, just actually talk about both the value that foster carers give to our most vulnerable children that we're looking after as an authority, but also the rewards that you get from being a foster carer. I've had the privilege of meeting many foster carers over the last couple of years that I've been in this portfolio position. And frankly, although the reward is important, and it is important that we reward them, actually that's not the reason they do it. The reason they do it is they know what they're achieving, whether they're fostering babies, knowing that the importance of that first year of attachment, so those babies are well adjusted for moving towards adoption, or whether they're fostering older children whose families are broken down, that they have to have look after for either a short time or a slightly longer time before they're either able to go back to their family or before other arrangements are made. They're providing such a valuable service, and they can see the satisfaction they get from that work is really important, and that's the driving force for them. So to be able to share that good news, as well as being able to share the promotional materials that we put out, will be extremely valuable.
Great, thank you, Councillor Chandler. Thank you, Jen, for that. That's very helpful. And Councillor Howes, did you have any?
Yeah, no, sorry. Could I just thank Councillor Chandler and Jane for that information? And I'll also note that on the comms side, that the team are now going out monthly to each of our hubs. I think there are regular sort of drop-in sessions. And I certainly noticed in my ward in Usk, there's I think the first Wednesday of every month, 12 to 2, there's a drop-in session, and I noticed all the other towns were on there as well. So if anyone listening on here was interested, a good opportunity to have a chat it through with the team. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Howes, and well said. The more we get that message out there, the better. That's really, really helpful. Moving on to Councillor Pavia. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, Ben.
Yeah,
Councillor Keller.
Second question.
You were going to come back on the question of
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I just wanted to pick up Councillor Howes' second question, and also just to not to cover ground we've already covered, but I think the whole point of the increase in the foster care fees, aside from all of the great things that Councillor Chandler mentioned, is it should be cost neutral. Like this is an investment in the future. We're showing it as a £300,000 cost pressure in our budget for this year, but we're expecting that by investing in this service, we will offset that by reducing our spend on agency fees. So it really seems like a win-win to me. On the question of the budget consultation, it's been, I think, going well so far. We've had pretty good engagement. We've got another session. It might be the third online session this evening. We've got about 20 people signed up at the moment. So yeah, I think the sessions, from my perspective, have been very good. They've been very challenging, which is what I want to see. People really getting into the proposals and asking us to justify the proposals, which is really important. So I've been pleased with how it's been going so far. There's always a bit of a double-edged sword with some of these consultations, because like on one hand, if you put forward a proposal which is reasonable, uncontroversial, as often as not, you won't actually get much engagement with it, because people will read it, they will see it, and they will say, okay, I'm satisfied with that, and therefore I don't necessarily need to raise my voice for it. But the converse of that is, if you put something very controversial within your proposals, you do get a big response from the community, and it's always, I think, a challenge for the local authority to get the reach that we want, even when something non-controversial is being proposed, just to, I guess, it enables us to do that quality check on the work that we're doing and making sure that we're responding to the needs and the desires of our population. So it is a challenge, but I think this year, so far, it's been going very well. Similar to Councillor Chandler's point about us advertising our foster care service, looking for new foster carers, we are putting out a lot of information on all of all the social channels on the internet to try and get people to engage. I know for a lot of people that's not the best way to reach them. So if you see people in your community, talk to them about it, talk to your residents about them. If you go to your community councils, talk to your community councils about it, try and get them to come back and feedback, and talk to the people they know about it, because as I mentioned earlier, it does make the budget better if we have that feedback and we are able to respond to that feedback. The feedback will be collated after the budget consultation ends on the 22nd of February, and we've got a fortnight then between that and our cabinet setting out our final budget, and in that time the data from the consultation will be collated. It will be presented to cabinet in order that we can we can do that quality check and take into account the views that were raised during the consultation. And I'd also say that the scrutiny meetings that we do with the budget across this committee, across place committee, across people committee, all of that feedback is also, as you'd expect, considered when we come to setting the final budget.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. And just in regard to that, I think in 3.3 in the report, you refer to what you've just talked about, which is the importance of engaging and listening to our residents. I've been hearing from some residents who've said that they've attended budget engagement sessions, and the only people there have been communications staff, and that there hasn't been a cabinet member there to ask questions about the budget, or hopefully to get answers to. So they've actually found it very disappointing. I just wonder if you have any comment on that, because that would be disappointing if that's the situation. It's very hard to engage and listen if you're not there.
Yeah, I think what we're doing is a number of drop-in sessions around the council within our hubs. They last for a number of hours. We're doing them all over the county, and these tend to be led by officers. Officers should have all the information available to answer any residents' questions, and if they don't, that should get fed back and contact details taken. I wish I could attend all of these meetings, but you'll imagine that, you know, my diary is absolutely jam-packed during this month, conducting all of the scrutiny, all of the budget consultation events. So I'm afraid I'm not able to attend, all the events that I would like to. So yeah, like as you mentioned, it is disappointing that we can't be everywhere all the time, but unfortunately, that's the nature of it.
Yeah, do other cabinet members attend? Because what I've been hearing is that, a cabinet member, not that, with all due respect, people understand you can't be multiple places all at once, but I'm just trying to understand if that's something that other cabinet members are attending.
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I apologise, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chandler, I think you were trying to come in on the main point.
Yeah, just to supplement what Councillor Callard said, because obviously he talked about the public engagement sessions and the scrutiny sessions around the budget. Of course, there are also some very direct consultation groups with others. I know within the children's schools sector, there's been some targeted consultation, same in social care. So just to give a flavour for Councillor Howells, one of the consultations we undertook on the budget in social care is with the users of the My Mates service. My Mates is a service that runs across Gwent for adults with a learning disability, and it's a service of peer support to help them actually engage and go out and have fulfilled social lives and interesting lives. So a number of those came together for a budget engagement session where we went through some issues in the budget and took feedback from them on what they felt were important services for them and what the council was doing well and less well, and how that impacted on our budget decisions. So these are the types of things that don't necessarily get highlighted a great deal because they happen behind closed doors in small groups. So it's not just the big online and engagement sessions and the ones in the hubs. There's a number of other things that we're doing that will all get fed into the review where we then make final adjustments to the budget in light of feedback.
Thank you, Councillor Chandler. It's all important. And Councillor Howells, are you content with that?
I am. Thanks very much, Chair. Yep. So
over to Councillor Pavia.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Paul Pavia, member of this committee. I thank Councillor Callard for his presentation. I was struck by an intervention that the Future Generations Commissioner made a couple of weeks ago in relation to the Welsh Government's draft budget. He wrote to the Finance Minister, Mark Drakeford, throwing down the challenge, really, about highlighting the importance of long-term thinking to drive prevention investments. And I think this specific question is around prevention and demand management in particular. I think that was on page 3 of the presentation. And he said in the letter, and I'm just going to quote what he said, "We all want healthy lives, a thriving economy and environment, but our health, both physical and mental, is deteriorating, and so is our environment. If we are to face the challenges before us in both the short and long term, we have no choice but to turn to widespread prevention across all government departments as well as throughout Wales at a local level. Without action, spending on prevention will continue to be a casualty of intense pressures on day-to-day budgets and a victim of short-term thinking." So just in terms of the presentation, there's nothing in this presentation I can see, and I appreciate its high-level presentation looking at headline budget costs, but there's nothing in the direction of narrative that says we are going to invest or reallocate more money in prevention and early intervention to stem the demand that is coming from the public wanting to access our service front door. So I wondered if Councillor Callard could comment on that. The second element there under service demand, managing that demand, and it says our residents will rightly expect us to reduce costs wherever possible and to ensure we operate as effectively and as efficiently as we can. Now, I can see from this item and the next agenda item we're carrying a lot of vacancies, and it seems like restructuring of departments and the realisation of the permanent removal of those posts are going to realise savings, and obviously that's one way to find efficiencies. But how we commission and procure services and equipment is also crucial, and I would expect that for example, with our social care providers, for example, we'd have an open book approach to understand increases in costs and fees and charges. But how do we do that with our other providers on our commissioning framework? And for example, I'm a governor at a school. We have companies providing services to property services in school in relation to maintenance, and I've seen quotes recently which I think are disproportionate. So how do we focus on those other providers on our commissioning framework to ensure we're getting value for money for those services? And finally, Chair, in relation to schools, and I think we've got a situation now where we've got nearly 70% of our schools in deficit, and whilst I think someone commented earlier on the budget recovery sits with the schools, we know that the realisation of those savings for some schools is going to take a significant amount of time to realise. We know we're carrying a significant amount of surplus places across our clusters, but there's nothing in this presentation that says we're going to address that in this next financial year. And I appreciate that might mean making some difficult decisions around our school estate, our asset base, as well as working with schools in relation to leadership structures in terms of federation of schools. But we know we're going to have a gap, even if the Welsh Government comes in with a funding floor, there likely is going to be a gap. So surely that is an option that needs to be on the table. So I wonder if Councillor Callard could comment on that as well, please.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia, and Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Chair. If it's okay, I'll bring in Councillor Chandler just to talk about the prevention work that's been ongoing within our Health and Social Care Directorate.
Thank you, and Councillor Chandler.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Councillor Pavia. I couldn't agree more with the Future Generations Commissioner. Absolutely critical that we look at how we focus on prevention to prevent or delay the need for people to be accessing care. Although I have to say that I prefer to actually flip it around. That prevention is a very council-focused thing. I put it more in terms of actually the residents themselves. What we're doing is we're promoting independent well-being. We're promoting community connections. We're promoting resilience. All of those things so that they don't need that access. They have more resources either within their own family or within their local communities that they can draw on. So no, absolutely critically important. I would say though that prevention is wrapped up with tackling inequality, and I think that's one of the things that runs through our community and corporate plan is we want to tackle inequality. We know, as a marmot region that the difference in healthy life expectancy between the more prosperous part of our population and the least prosperous. We're talking about a minimum of 10 or 12 years difference in that healthy life expectancy. So those that are coming from more deprived areas, more deprived circumstances, are more likely to be needing to call upon health or social care earlier than those from our more prosperous residents. So tackling inequality is a huge part of that, and that runs all the way through. From even the extra £1 million that we're spending on education is going to be trying to tackle school attendance and those issues. Again, that's an equality issue that will have long-term consequences. We're not going to see the benefit in terms of social care for that for many years, but using that. What we are doing though is we're in the middle of drawing together a project to look at a whole authority approach to prevention. So taking out of the social care area and looking at how all of our parts of our authority, whether it is in One Life, whether it is in education and learning, whether it is in our hubs and libraries, whether it's in our community development work and our engagement with the third sector organisations, our partnerships with health and other public bodies, how do we align that so it is focused and more targeted towards those most in need to tackle their well-being and independence and therefore prevent them coming through. And that's a growing area. It's not featuring in the budget because there's no budget attached to it at the moment. It's more about aligning the work that we already do and realigning some of the activities and refocusing that so it's not seen as a particular budget pressure on itself. other than there are some things that are in the social care budget we're talking about in terms of increase in spending on frailty, trying to transition more of our work into reablement. But again, that's lined up with some of our practice change in adult social care, so where we've a new commissioning model for domiciliary care is actually enabling us to refocus some of our in-house care facility onto reablement. So again, that has a preventative approach to preventing people from becoming or reducing their need for domiciliary care in the future. It doesn't have its own budget line, or it doesn't have its own narrative, but it's in many ways it's a thread that's running through a lot of the different activities that we're talking about, not necessarily budget related, although they do have long-term budget impacts. So I hope that gives a sufficient response to that question.
Perhaps, just following up with Councillor Pavia's, comment and question about prevention, perhaps it is something that in future years we should be focusing as a budget line prevention, because the resident, listening to that explanation and helpful as it is, might really not hear a great deal behind it, other than we do a lot. And we'll keep doing a lot. Actually, I think the implication from Councillor Pavia's question was that we need to change gear, we need to do significantly more than we've been doing, and perhaps that's something that we should, as a local authority, consider making a specific point about in terms of prevention in future years. But appreciate very much the challenge that this presents for everybody. Can I also bring Councillor Callagher? I don't know if it's something you want to address, but it was a question about value for money in connection particularly with schools, and also budget recovery questions, again very much related to schools. Did you comment?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the questions, Councillor Pavia. We had a meeting actually as part of the budget consultation with the governors of our schools, which was a really good session, and they raised exactly this question, about some of the costs associated with them contracting work, and I suppose their reaction to some of the costs associated with some work. And I'm with them a lot of the time, when you see some of the costs associated, what you or I might think to be actually quite minor works, some of these contractors, it does raise a value for money question. It's something that we're keen to support our schools with, and the feedback that we had for them is that, they are welcome to bring forward contractors to us to potentially go on our approved contractors list. In order that we can improve our value for money, and we're happy to support them to do that. Any school can go out and get a number of quotations for work and present them to us, so we can okay that work. I suppose it's probably also a question of, really, do the schools have the capacity as well to go out and do that work to get the quotations? So I do appreciate that it's not straightforward, but yeah, value for money is something that I think we're all very aware of and very keen to continue to deliver better value for money. Your question about the schools and about places within our schools, it's something that we're aware of. We speak a lot about the changing demographics within the authority, and how our median age continues to increase, and what this looks like for the viability of our schools. We're not proposing any changes to our school estate at this time. We all know that changes to schools are very, very big decisions, and they really affect the communities in which they take place. I was at my local community council meeting in Gavilan a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the closure of Gavilan School, which happened many years ago, and how residents there still feel like part of their community is missing because that school isn't there. So I understand that these topics are extremely emotive. I suppose we can address that in two ways. One of the ways which you mentioned is potentially consolidating the school estate. we're not looking to do that as part of these budget proposals. The other way is to try and increase the number of younger people that we have in the authority in order to fill those spaces. That's a longer term piece of work, but I really think that the replacement local development plan that's coming through, that's intended to provide that housing, that cheaper, more affordable housing for younger families who are currently contending with the extremely high cost of housing within Monmouthshire, in order that we can, I guess, bolster our population of younger people, bolster our school populations. And I think that, that's got the potential to have really positive outcomes for our communities. You also mentioned about 70% of our schools being in deficit. I would agree with you completely that it is a concerning situation. We are working with our schools to support them with their budgets where we can, in order to better understand and potentially advise them on ways in which they can become more financially sustainable. But I think, as part of this budget, we certainly recognise that there are pressures on our schools, and the additional £1 million that we're putting towards our school, will support them. We know it's not going to, write off their deficit overnight, and we wouldn't expect it to. And in fact, we wouldn't want it to, because, some of our schools do need to, make some changes in order that they can make themselves more financially sustainable. We've got some really fantastic schools in our authority that do some great work, and building those bridges between our schools in order that they can share best practice, is also a really important piece of work, and that work continues within our education portfolio. I don't know. I know we've got Will McLean in the chamber, Chief Officer, in this directorate. So if Will wants to add anything.
Will. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Callard. Will McLean, Strategic Director for Learning, Skills and Economy. In terms of the question specifically around the schools, the number of schools, the surplus places and so on, that is an area of work which we keep constantly under review. There are some particular areas in Monmouthshire where the problem is more acute than other areas, and we are developing a set of proposals around those areas which will seek to address that. As Councillor Callard alluded to just before, it's not a quick fix by any stretch. The consultation processes can take a long time. None of our schools are in the kind of size category which enable the speedy closure route from Welsh Government. They would all take the full consultation process. And we have to recognise the different types of schools that we have in our communities. So those which are religious in their nature and character, how they work with schools which are community schools is different in terms of the way the law works. So we've got to work those things through. I think as we go forward, though, I think we will need to look at the leadership structures of our schools. This is something which we have looked at in the past. We have two federations in Monmouthshire. We have federations between Llanfoist and Llanfihangel in the north of the county, and also Cyminview and Llandogo in the east of the county as well, and they've really proven to be kind of positive developments in terms of supporting those smaller schools, enabling them to have access to more improvement resources, but also just for the children's kind of experience of school as well, enable them to go on kind of different experiences. And as we look to the new Welsh curriculum, our access to those learning experiences was what is vital. I think in terms of us really trying to attract the very best head teachers into Monmouthshire, I think when we look at the other local authorities in Gwent, you see primary schools that are far bigger than ours, and with bigger primary schools there's a direct correlation to a higher level of salary, and that does attract a different group, I'm not necessarily going to say calibre, a different group of head teachers and applicants. So when we look to the south, when we look at Newport, they often have primary schools of about 600 pupils. We don't have any schools of that size at all. So it is something we need to look at, and it will be something which I think we'll be taking forward in the coming year.
Councillor Pavitt, did you want to come back on any of those?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And can I thank Councillor Callan and Will and Councillor Chandler for their comments. In terms of Councillor Chandler's comments. I really look forward to look forward to seeing that across local authority prevention strategy. I think that'd be fantastic. Although I do think you could have had a positive comment in the budget presentation about managing demand of service. I think that would have been welcome to residents. Well, I understand what the chair says in terms of trying to unpick that in a sentence or two. It would be difficult, but I think that could have been in there. In terms of what Councillor Callard said about the property maintenance response, I think he's absolutely right. I mean, having a head teacher or other senior leaders in a school, and that includes governors, to undertake that work is challenging. I mean, there are risks for head teachers and governing bodies for going off framework in terms of managing that, and essentially become project managers, and the authority sort of steps back from that process. Although I understand that there are support mechanisms in place to a certain degree to help that head teacher to manage that, but that is a significant thing to do. But in terms of focusing on those costs, I think it really is important to ensure our commissioned providers are demonstrating value for money. I think that's it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. And as a matter of what might be some interest to members of the committee, I've asked Robert to arrange for a report on commissioning and procurement to come to the committee, and particularly looking at value for money and the involvement and the role of the council in regard to that, to see how that's going also across the procurement framework. So we'll be looking at that later in the year. I know Robert's working on that just now. Moving on then to Councillor Garrett. Thank you, Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Callard and all the officers who contributed. Just got a couple of questions about the Monlife budget. Firstly, the Borough Theatre. Has any thought been given to looking at the model that's used in the Savoy and Monmouth, where we have a trust that's running it successfully? We've got a varied programme of events, stage events, cinema, stage performances that are broadcast in the theatre. So, we've got, it seems to run on quite a successful model there with the trust running it, and whether that's something that we maybe look at and explore in the future. And secondly, it was to do with the leisure income as well. As what kind of plans are there for increasing income? For example, I was just checking this morning, there's no family membership at the moment, so is there any thought that we could drive membership numbers by maybe looking at offers? There was an offer done for the new year, I think, to reduce costs, and there is a kind of couple of months free on each membership, but has any thought being given to maybe family memberships or something like that to drive numbers? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garrett. And it is an important other part of the budget, opportunities for revenue, for income, what that might look like, and changing the model. And I don't know who wants to pick that up, but Councillor Callard, do you want to give that one a shot?
Yeah. And thank you for the questions, Councillor Garrett. I think, there's some really great, examples of where stuff's working really well within Monmouthshire. You mentioned the Savoy Theatre, and potentially lessons can be learnt in terms, how we can carry some of that success over and learn from them in the Borough Theatre. And I'll bring in Ian Saunders in just a moment, if that's okay, to talk a little bit more about the proposals for the Borough Theatre. And also, the idea for a family membership at our, for our Monlife, for the leisure centre specifically. I think that's also a really great idea. I mean, everyone else in my family is a member apart from me, because I don't, apart from taking the kids with me, I don't use the leisure centres that much. But I probably would be a member if there was some kind of family discount, even if it, because it would be an incremental increase in cost. So I do think that's a really good idea. But let me bring in Ian Saunders, if I may, just to talk a little bit more about the proposals for the Borough Theatre.
There we go. We've already signed one family up to the membership that we've not yet created, but it's a good start. Okay, Ian, did you want to come in?
That's a really good start. I guess the history of the Borough Theatre, we have actually explored a trust model, and it actually did go outside as a trust. For some members and colleagues in the room probably experienced that. And there was relative success for a period of time, but then ultimately, it didn't work, so we took it back into the local authority in the last 5 years. Always looking to look at partnerships and different ways of running services. So certainly it might be something that we explore in the future. Who knows with that one? But what I will say is bringing the Borough Theatre, Market Hall, all the different services in that building together in really good partnership with the town council as well is a really strong model, and I think there's still opportunities. Monlife have had the operating of the building for around two years now with the hub in the building as well. So there's certainly more we can do, and that's why the proposals come through as it is for this year. But who knows what operating models we look at in the future. The income in leisure centres, you'll be pleased to know, reporting to members widely, that the income has seen really good growth over the last months, and I think you'll see that possibly in the figures for you when you're looking at the in-year position. Really confident on the team and their delivery. They're always looking at new options. So the family membership is one that we can explore. We've got a lot of different memberships. They're all quite exciting, very good with the exercise referral and the Fit for Life, which has gone really well, which is the exit route from the exercise referral scheme. But obviously, the success of the fitness suites as a model has been extensive. The swimming programs have increased. So to bring those all into an exciting new membership package, we'll definitely explore that. So thank you.
Great. That sounds like a very constructive idea, Councillor Garrett, so thank you for that. We'll see where that one can go and any other opportunities there are related to that. Without any other hands that I can see up, I've just got a few areas that I'd be interested to ask about. Looking at it from the point of view of the residents, I think we'd probably all agree that they tend to look at their council tax bill as a whole, and what lands on their doormat, when it comes through the post, and they're looking at what amounts to 23% increase in council tax over a 3-year period, and as a cumulative amount, which is again in the current year proposed 3 times inflation. Many of those residents, they run small businesses, they run businesses, or they work for small businesses, and they know that they can't do that. They can't simply charge 2 or 3 or even more times inflation because it's just not conceivable to them. So I'm very interested to know how you would respond to our residents who are going to be thinking those sorts of thoughts, and how that relates to the point that's in the presentation about being a financially responsible council, because many will not think that. So I'd be interested in your comments around that. If I may ask also about the way that we are going to be planning on saving money in our services. So we'll be looking at the financial update very, very shortly, but we have a track record of not being able to achieve the savings that we project that we're going to save. And that is something that I think is going to be a concern in terms of the credibility of projecting very significant savings in the coming year. So I'd be very interested to understand just how we might be able to reassure residents that the plan is based on something that's very solid, as opposed to hope and expectation, which would be something well short of a plan. And just lastly, I suppose most people would agree that actually our public services all depend upon the private sector employing people, building their business, employing people, and the businesses and the employees, they pay their taxes, and that allows us to have a public sector. And I'm just interested to see anywhere in the plan We actually have a service which involves the use of economy as part of the purpose of the service. Is there anything in the plan that is there to support the business sector? And whether or not in that, given the challenges of managing our expenditure, why not engage with business leaders in Monmouthshire and ask for a group of those business leaders to actually work with you to look to bring down your costs? What have we got to lose? What have you got to lose by engaging with some people who every day of their working lives are doing that very thing? So those three questions, if I may. Thank you. Councillor Callard?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Firstly, about council tax, I know the parallel will be drawn, which you have just drawn, between the rate of increase that we're proposing for council tax and the current rate of inflation. I think what we've seen, and this is laid out in the presentation, is that whereas we do have inflationary pressure on our services, actually most of the cost pressure we're seeing is not down to inflation. It's down to increasing demand and increasing complexity of demand on our services. So I suppose always my question back when somebody, when we are challenged, and we are rightly challenged on why are you putting up council tax so much, is what is the alternative? Which services would you like to see reduced, or where would you like to see the council's expenditure reduced in order that we can have a lower increase of council tax? And I know, it's very easy for someone to say, oh, we just want more money from Welsh government, but let's not forget that that's also taxpayers' money. So our funding is pretty much completely from taxpayers' money, apart from the income that we generate through some of our services which bring fees. So I think that there's always that question. We feel as an administration that the services that this council provides are really very valuable to our residents, and our default position is to protect our public services. You can see in this that actually we're still having to make £5.1 million worth of cuts to our services. In fact, framing them as cuts is not quite honest, because some of them are just efficiency savings within them. Some of them are increases in income. But £5.1 million of changes within our services in order to balance this budget. So if, it would be, I would love to be able to come before this committee, to talk to our public with a lower rate of increase of council tax, because we know it's challenging. But I think on balance that this is the right way to proceed with council tax, because it protects the services that we know our residents value so much. We all get challenged. I get challenged regularly to say, oh, well, I only have my bins collected and my council tax is going up by this much and the roads are in a terrible state. But we know, as I've shown in the presentation, that actually the council provides a huge breadth of services all across our communities and supports thousands of people every single day in our county. And I think we're all proud of the work that they do within Monmouthshire. And so I'm happy to go out there and support our services, because I know how much our residents rely on them. Your second question on forecasting savings, it's a very valid one. You mentioned that we'll come on to month 9 in a moment on the in-year position, but within 24-25 financial year, we've realised about 80% of our projected savings, which does leave a shortfall. In last year's budget, we looked to make £8 million worth of savings within our services. This year, we are proposing making £5 million. You will be aware of how challenging local authority finances are. There's not a day where there's not a headline in the paper about a local authority in England or in Wales who is talking about how much pressure they are under. And I think, in Monmouthshire, we've actually managed very well considering the pressure that we've been under the last few years. When we forecast into the next year, it's using the best data that we have in order to take the best judgment on how demand is going to look over the following financial year. Now, in the last couple of years, we have seen overspends, as you mentioned, especially within social care and health. That's been offset by some better outcomes in other areas. We are accommodating a huge amount of pressure within social care and health within this next year's budget. But as I mentioned, it does carry risk. And I can tell you one thing's for absolute certainty, and that is that pound, we will not hit the exact pound numbers in each of our services next year at the end of the financial year. That's just not the way it works. We get as close as we can with the forecasting that we've got, and we aim to balance at the end of the year. So I hope that helps you with that question about forecasting. I know, John can potentially come in, and talk a little bit more about the quality assurance work that we do within our forecasting for next year, because it is important that we get, as you mentioned, that we're as accurate as possible. Could you remind me of your last question, please, Chair? It slips my mind.
Sorry, it was very much about the support that we offered to the wealth generators who are employers all over the county, and is there anything that we are doing for them? But why not also engage with some business leaders who are very, very often very good at finding ways of managing costs very effectively, and get them to work with you? And what have you got to lose in doing that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I think with the business community, we frequently engage with the business community through the chambers of commerce. They are, I believe, part of the budget consultation as well, in terms of trying to make sure that we hear their voice and we support them as best we can with our policies. We also use a lot of the private sector to deliver the services. Jonathan Davis earlier talked about, the indirect national insurance contribution cost, and that is because we contract a lot of services out to private organisations. Now, in some cases, those private organisations provide very good value for money. In some cases, they don't, which is why you've seen proposals in this budget of us bringing services back in-house, back into Monmouthshire County Council, because we believe that we can provide better service and better value for money by bringing services back into the authority. And on bringing in private businesses to consult us on value for money, I would say that I hear a lot more negativity about the use of consultants than I do people encouraging us to use more consultants in order to advise us on how we should do things. So I think that's a bit of a double-edged sword, that one.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting consultants. I'm talking about business people who work and may be prepared to work with you to look at whether or not there are more efficiencies that could be made within the council.
I mean, I am always willing, and the authority is always willing to talk to these communities. But I think that's quite a woolly proposal, if I may say so, Chair. And I'm not sure how many business leaders out there in our communities are lining up to say, I'm going to give some of my time free of charge to the local authority in order that I could advise them on how they could do things better. We really value our business community and we want to work with them, and we will of course engage them, whenever we make changes to policy. But I'm not sure there's a group of people who are lining up to provide free consultancy to the authority on how we could do things better.
Well, maybe we should ask, because we might be surprised. I think that so many will be mystified by local authorities when we describe cuts, but at the same time, our overall budget increases from 220 million to 238 million. I think it must be a great mystery to a great many how those two things are reconciled. But it's a suggestion that you might want to consider, that I'm sure there are people out there who are very experienced at managing cost and may well be prepared to give some hours to see how they could help the county, and perhaps that's something you might want to consider exploring. What's to lose?
I'm absolutely happy to consider it, Chair.
Okay, great. Thank you, Councillor Callard, and thank you also to colleagues who have responded on those questions. We're going to be moving on to agenda item 5, but I'm going to suggest... sorry, I noticed, Councillor McConnell, you've come in at the last minute.
Yes, sorry about that.
I was just about to declare a break for...
I'll be very quick.
Between the two agendas.
It's a sort of supplementary to the question that was just being answered. So I understand the massive majority of our budget is spent on education and social care. Those are things where we as a council are statutorily obliged to meet needs as they arise, and those needs are rising at faster than the rate of inflation. So that's and that gives us the challenge we have to meet. So that's been a situation for quite a few years now. I'm just wondering, and that exercise is done every time, so looking at projecting for the needs arising, particularly in social care. So I'm wondering, is it a straight line? Is that increasing in a straight line basis upwards, or is there any sign of it levelling off or accelerating? Because I'm guessing that those of you who've done this exercise over a number of years would have a feel for that. Thank you.
So, Councillor Callard, I thought I'd let you off there, but we're back on again on this one. So, did you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor. I'll bring in Jonathan Davis, if okay, to give a bit of history, but I guess my headline is that our demographics continue to bring this pressure forward. Our council continues to have an aging population. That trend is set to continue. We've seen this population spike. It kind of the baby boomer generation from the the late 40s to the late 50s. As that comes through, it's placing more and more of cost pressure onto our social care. As these people move, I guess, into later retirement, and also the complexity that's associated with that care. So, I guess from my view, I don't see that situation easing anytime soon. I do think that potentially Wales-wide, potentially UK-wide, we do need to have a structural look about how we provide social care across this country. I know it's been promised so many times, over the past decades, people have talked about a national care service, but I think once the costs are factored in, it does become quite an uncomfortable subject. But it is something that we are going to have to grapple with, as a country, to try and make sure that we are, providing good care, dignity to people as they age and require care. John, did you want to briefly come in and just talk about the trend that you've seen? Is that okay, Chair?
I think, John, you're asking Jane to... Thank you, Councillor Callard, but perhaps, Jane, you want to pick that one up fairly briefly, if I may.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to come in. I think, as Councillor Callard has said, it's difficult to see how, at the moment, the increasing trend in needs of older adults within the county are going to ease back, but that's not to say it is really quite it can be quite unpredictable in terms of small variations. Certainly after the pandemic, we have seen that steady increase, rather rapid rise actually, in terms of the highest level of need around residential care home. But offsetting that, we've had a slight stabilisation around the provision of care at home hours, for example. And it's never quite a straightforward matter, in the sense that sometimes your need can go up, but your costs might stabilise, or your need might stabilise, but your costs increase. It's never quite a 2 + 2 = 4 type of situation. And looking at children for a moment, number of children looked after has very much stabilised and has showed a downward trend, but our costs have increased because of the operating context that we're in. So it's quite a difficult situation. In terms of our overall trends of need, though, I can't see them receding in the near future.
Thank you, and thank you for the question and answer. Yeah, I was merely going to say I suggest we take a 5-minute break, if that's agreeable to. I think I've had a request for a 10-minute break. Let's call it a 7.5 minute and see how we do. Split the difference. So we're going to do that just now and come for a break and start up again. We'll aim for 10 minutes past 12, if that's okay. And thank you for bearing with us. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. We're just going to restart the meeting now, and thanks if you're online. If you are able to pop your cameras on again, that would be great. Sorry, I think we were probably waiting for you, and you're probably waiting for us as one of those lobster dances that we've just been doing there. But we're ready to restart. Okay, great, thank you. And we're looking at item 5 on the agenda, which is the financial update. And Councillor Callard, did you want to take us through the overview of that?
Thank you, Chair. The 2024-2025 financial year, as you'll have been aware, has seen a continuation of financial headwinds which are impacting upon the Council's service operating environment. Summarised, these are the wider socio-economic landscape and cost of living challenges. These continue to have an impact on our communities, with a consequential increase in demand for council services and impact upon income-generating services. This particularly impacts the service areas of children's social care, adult social care, homelessness, and children's additional learning needs. Wider public sector challenges continue to impact upon council services, notably within health, where efforts to improve patient pathways impact upon the level and complexity of demand for social care. And whilst headline inflation has fallen, some areas of council services continue to experience cost pressure on supplies and services alongside supply chain issues. And the council continues to deal with a shortage of staff resources in some areas. In December 2024, Cabinet received a financial update reporting a forecast budget deficit of £4,353,000 alongside budget recovery action of just over £1 million that, if delivered successfully, would reduce the deficit to £3,334,000. The updated budget deficit now stands at £1,593,000 and is reflective of favourable movements within the majority of service budget areas, reflective of successful budget recovery action and additional grant income received at the end of the 2024 calendar year. The overall deficit is primarily due to a forecast shortfall in meeting required budgeted savings targets of £2,376,000, alongside significant in-year budget pressures of £2,840,000 within social care that have developed since the budget was set in February 2024. These have been significantly offset by favourable positions within some of our income-generating services and in savings in capital financing costs. In December 2024, Welsh Government notified us of additional grant funding of £1.3 million to manage local government pay pressures, which has significantly improved the overall forecast. This funding has been reflected within the Corporate Treasury and Financing section, given the timing of the receipt and the non-specific nature of the funding. Appendix 1 to the report outlines the service variances in detail. The budget planning framework for 2024-2025 was clear that there was the need to progress the Council on a path towards financial sustainability, including conserving an appropriate and prudent level of financial resilience, of which the Council's reserves are a key component. As a consequence, the final revenue budget proposals of 2024-2025 did not include any use of reserves to meet recurrent revenue expenditure. The delivery of a balanced budget for 2024-2025, alongside substantial budget recovery action within schools, remains fundamental in maintaining financial stability and limiting any further impact upon the Council's reserves. This third financial update for the year represents a move on a more positive trajectory towards delivering a balanced year-end budget position. The actions of services to engage in budget recovery action and to maintain financial discipline is positive and is to be commended. It's essential that this path continues through to year-end and that all possible opportunities to mitigate further cost and maximise income are taken. And thank you, Chair. I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. And just looking to see if any colleagues have questions about the update. I see Councillor Strong's hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Callard. There are a number of references to savings being made through vacancies. We've heard this morning how that can be part of a planned process, particularly in the bigger departments where you're holding open vacancies as part of as I say, a planned process, and that avoids redundancies and disruption and so on in that way. I'm a bit more uncomfortable though when it applies to much smaller groupings of staff where we're not really, as I assume, looking to reduce the number of staff. I mean, just an example is the civic enforcement officers, where we're making savings through vacancies. We have to be careful that those savings are at the cost of what is actually a frontline service in civic enforcement. Parking officers is what we're really talking about here. Specifically in relation to those officers, I assume that the saving listed, the amount listed, is the salary with the usual online costs. Do we set against that any income generation that we get from the fines that those officers will issue? I'm sure that's not a popular demand with some residents of Monmouthshire, but will be popular with many more who are plagued by rogue parking. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. I don't know, Councillor Callard, if you wanted to address that, or Jonathan.
I think that's a bit technical for me, I'm afraid, Chair, so I'll hand over to Jonathan if that's okay.
Sure, thanks. Jonathan.
Thank you, Councillor Strong and Councillor Callard. So I think if I maybe take the question back to front, so yes is the answer. I think that position that we're reporting would have taken all of that in the round, and would have taken account of the potential impact on being able to get out there and pursue that enforcement action. So I think where the service is holding those vacancies, that's a pre-planned way of approaching it. I think what's probably important to note is that this is something that has developed over quite a few years in terms of the budget position that we found ourselves in. You'll appreciate that we've had a targeted vacancy freeze in place, and I think the onus on targeted, it's where it can be achieved with very minimal impact on that frontline service, or where other arrangements can be in place to accommodate those changes. So that obviously varies department by department, but I think in this specific case, we're comfortable that this is a position that we can hold at the moment, but there will be a review, as you say, taking into account both the income that we're generating, the issues that we're seeing with parking throughout the county, and should changes need to be made as we move forward, that will need to be taken account of.
Thank you. Councillor Strong, did you want to follow up?
That's fine. I've never been fined for parking within Monmouthshire, but if I do, I'll let the fact that the money's coming into the council ease my pain somewhat.
You've probably just put a target on your head there, Councillor Strong. I've never been caught yet, sort of thing.
Bristol City Council got me as a target, I'm sure.
Okay. Councillor Garrett, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Callard. My question is around neighbourhood services and the waste and grounds maintenance overspend of £678,000. I note it's due to the volatility of recyclable prices, but there's also mention about workplace recycling regulations leading to reduced volumes. I wondered if we could have a bit more detail about what's happened there. Is that maybe businesses are finding alternative waste disposal options, but maybe aren't contributing to recycling rates? As a council, this council and the previous council have done extremely well to get our recycling rates amongst the best in Wales. So how can we review that overspend? Firstly, what's caused it? And secondly, is there anything we can do maybe with businesses to encourage them? I know my place of work, we've got a really good recycling program going. Everyone's involved in it. We talked earlier about no one in this room, I think, wants the plastic straw to be returned, unlike President Trump's executive order. So, what can we do to mitigate the risks around that figure and also, encourage more recycling rates in the county? Thank you.
I hope you're not suggesting there should be a leader's executive order approach to these things, Councillor Garrett. It's an interesting question. If I may also say, look, as much as Monmouthshire County Council deserves credit for moving up for increasing the recycling rates, I think we really want to pass the credit on to our residents who are really engaging, with that programme, and the more the better. I think they are hearing that. But your questions are very valid. Sorry, I didn't mean to take anything away from them. Councillor Callard, did you want to respond?
Thank you, Chair. I'd completely echo what you say there about recycling rates. We're lucky, I suppose in Wales, we're one of the best countries recycling in the whole world. And like you say, it's really down to our residents engaging in the process. So, I definitely credit them for that. On the specific pressures that we're facing within our Waste Directorate, I'm afraid I can't see from my screen share, but is Deb Hill-Howells in the chamber in order to provide a little bit more background on that information?
Yes,
I am.
And welcome to the meeting.
Thanks, Deb.
Good afternoon, I'm Deb Hill-Howells. I'm the Interim Chief Officer for Infrastructure. I hope I caught most of the question on my running back into this chamber. My understanding is you were querying why there's an overspend on trade waste and why we had some budget changes as regards the recyclables as well.
That's it, yeah.
In terms of trade waste, we introduced a number of schemes off the back of the new legal requirement of businesses to actually now recycle their waste. What that has resulted in is that some of the businesses that were members of our previous scheme have reduced their demand. They've dropped down in terms of the costs that they are now charged because they've gone into a different scheme. So that has resulted in us actually having an additional cost of collecting all the different waste, but at the same time a reduction in the fee income. We're reviewing all of those costs. It was the first year that we've actually run this. We have been learning as we move along. Those costs will be changed as we move forward into the next financial year and those trade waste companies come forward. At the same time, we have a legal duty to collect trade waste, so where other previous customers have moved and they've gone to different customers, we still have to collect waste for those that want to stay with us. So the less customers we have, the more the costs increase per customer for us. And in terms of the recycler, yes, there has been variation and volatility in the recycler market. We are in the process of going through a procurement exercise at this moment in time, and we're endeavouring to change that position again for the next financial year.
Thank you, Deb. That's very helpful. And Councillor Garrett, did you want to follow up? Or are you content?
No, that's great. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And I see Councillor Howell's hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ben, for your presentation. Councillor Callard. Given that 78% or 10.9 million of the budget service savings have been achieved, how confident are we addressing in the shortfall of 2.376 million? And my second question is, with 69% of the schools, 24 out of 35, forecasted to end the financial year in a deficit, what support can we see is being put in place for the schools in developing an effective recovery plan? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Howells. And back to you, Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask for some clarification, Councillor Howells, on that 2.7 million? Our deficit at the moment, forecast for year end, is 1.5, well, nearly 1.6. So I just wondered if you could clarify that 2.7.
Sorry, I thought I read that in the report there. Let's have a look.
It was 2.8 million at the end of quarter 2. It might be that.
Item 3.3. On the page, the Cabinet note, a forecast 78.3 delivery of the 10.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Howells. So that is the shortfall in the savings that were achieved rather than the deficit that we're forecasting for the end of the year. I think, you know, and we did touch on it in the last agenda item when we talked about, you know, next year's budget in terms of, you know, overspend within the services and actually, you know, realistic target expectations for our savings delivery. It's always a challenge. It's always a challenge, especially with, you know, with the financial constraints that we find ourselves, you know, operating within. We're going to continue to work, as I mentioned in my introduction, you know, with the services in order to keep driving through the savings towards the end of the year. We know that, you know, I mean, in my day job in the private sector, you know, this can be the kind of time of year as you run towards year end where, you know, sometimes people take their foot off the gas with regards to budget control, and we're just making sure that that does not happen and that we're staying really focused on making sure that we're controlling costs in towards the end of the year in order that we can close out that remaining gap. I think it represents about 0.75 of our revenue budget. So, you know, we're not a long way out, but we're not quite there yet. So we need to make sure that we maintain that focus in order that we can balance come the end of the year. The second part of your question, Councillor Howells, I think was regarding schools' balances and the challenges there and how we respond to them. It's a challenge that we're acutely aware of. Part of our response to that is the additional £1 million that we're putting forward in next year's budget, you know, in order to help schools, you know, address some of their structural deficits. But in parallel to that, we're also supporting them and working with the leadership within the schools to, you know, go through their budgets with them, support them, you know, act as a critical friend in some instances in order to try and, you know, and make sure that again, our schools, I guess, are maximising their performance and are also doing so in a way that, you know, is not detrimental to the learners, or at least if, you know, any risk of that is mitigated.
Councillor Howells?
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Ben. Thanks for that explanation. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. And moving on to Councillor Pavian.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. A few questions in relation to social care, and particularly in children's social care. And I think it was referenced in the last item about issues around complexity, issues around increased costs due to that complexity, and obviously providers having to shoulder more in terms of inflation, etc. But have we seen over the last year, and particularly, you know, we're almost at the stage now where the Health and Social Care Wales Bill is going to get royal assent at the beginning of March. Are we seeing any shift in the market where providers are starting to exit, which then obviously reduces the number of providers there offering services, which obviously can impact on costs? Are we seeing any market shift in relation to that national policy agenda? The issue around CHC, and I know I'm a broken record on CHC, and I keep raising it. You know, we can see it's an issue.
Just for residents,
sorry, Chair. Yeah, continuing healthcare. So for those adults whose needs are deemed to be predominantly healthcare based, then the NHS has to fund that care. Although I know there's obviously ways in terms of looking at integrated care costs, and we obviously work closely with our health board partners in relation to that. But you know, we continue to identify an issue around cost shunting from the NHS to us as local authorities, and we won't be the only local authority within the region that is experiencing this cost pressure. And I'm sure there are ways, and we are using those channels and mechanisms to get the message to Welsh Government that this is an issue and it needs to resolve it as the sort of holder of the policy, or the responsible organisation responsible for policy. Yet it doesn't feel that we're we're making any progress. And I know it's a sensitive matter. We're working closely with the health board in relation to individual cases. But is there any discussion across the region with other neighbouring local authorities about taking action on this collective action to try and get this resolved once and for all? Because it's fundamentally unfair and it's wrong. It's technically a breach of the law for the NHS to do this. So I'm just wondering if there's any sort of collective push on trying to get this resolved across the region with the health board. And just finally, Chair, in relation to the housing and homelessness costs, I know there's there was a 400k shortfall because of Sevenview not coming into service until I think we're probably due very closely. It's going to be operational. It looks like a significant amount of that money has been found in relation to grant funding, but I noticed on the previous item 557,000 saving. So I just wondered if officers can possibly just sort of clarify that in my mind how that's working. And thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. So that's questions on providers, the impacts on providers, on continuing healthcare, and on the 400,000 on homelessness and the related question. Councillor Callan, did you want to pick any of that up?
Okay, Chair. I'll let Councillor Chandler and Jane take the first question.
Okay, great. So, Councillor Chandler.
Yeah, actually, I think I'm sorry, I'm just frog in the throat there. Yeah, just in terms of just context before I hand over for the more detailed answer to Jane, you're talking about the sort of children's social care and the pressures there. The context, as you know, is that children's care is very volatile in terms of our overall numbers of children that we're looking after is actually keeping quite stable, and actually relates to your question in the previous agenda item about prevention. Of course, I talked then about adult services, but of course in children's services we spend a lot on prevention. We invest quite heavily in our family time services, supporting families, keeping them together, and to try and reduce the numbers of children that need to be brought into our care. So those numbers are fairly stable. It's the cost pressure that we've had there is mainly because we've had some particularly the change between month 6 and month 9 figures is because we've just had a number of high cost placements, particularly parent and child placements. It doesn't take actually very many children coming into care, or particularly parents and children coming into care, to really shift your budget. We're talking 6 figures for each type of placement that's coming in. So that's the context mainly is the driver there. But in terms of the more detailed questions about private providers and about the continuing health care issues and Sevenview, I think I'd rather hand over to Jane to respond to those, please.
Great, Jane.
Thank you, Jane Rogers, Chief Officer for Social Care and Health. So in relation to the question around have we seen market shifts in the context of the changing policy landscape, I think the short answer is yes. It's an extremely volatile market when it comes to private provision for children's placements. So it's not just a simple matter of companies exiting, although there is a lot of uncertainty around which operators might remain and change to become not-for-profit, which organisations are simply just going to leave the market. We've also got providers coming in this sort of gap period, but charging extremely high prices for placements. So it's a really uncertain and unstable situation. And as ever, there is a high competitiveness for placements, which is, some of the drivers behind our desire to both increase our in-house carers, but also develop our own provisions as well, so that we've got control not only of the cost, but of the quality of the provision as well. I can't see the situation stabilising for some little time. So the more that we can do to take that back into our own control, the better, because that is absolutely the right thing for our children. Just picking up on what Councillor Chandler said, there are some situations where the needs of the children are so specialised that we will always need to fall back on a very diverse provider landscape of different sorts of placements, particularly parents and child placements, where a degree of independence is required from the courts to have confidence in the assessment. So that's that question. And in terms of the question around continuing healthcare, I think I wouldn't be out of place in saying that all local authorities share a real sense of frustration that this is just not moving forward to resolution. It's an extremely difficult issue to find ways forwards. It's one statutory body against another, when actually our intent and our aim and ambition is to work in an integrated way. Then you get this the horror, in a way, of having to sort of argue who's taking the care over some of our most complex residents and patients is really not to the benefit of anybody. But you're right in saying that progress has been extremely difficult to achieve, and for the local authority, we always put the needs of the people first, and if there's a service that has to be provided, we're going to provide it. You're then on the back foot when you're trying to argue your case through what is an extremely tortuous process of assessment and reviews and panels that is utterly opaque. And, we've tried as local authorities collectively in some ways to see where we can exert influence, but at the moment it does feel like we're stuck. And I think that was all my questions.
Yeah, it was... Sorry, it was this question. I think you covered that actually, but Councillor Pavia, in terms of your question around the impact of new legislation, were you particularly focused on the impact on the private sector and the way legislation might affect the market, such that costs might increase if some of those providers move out?
Yeah, I think, and I think, to be fair to Councillor Chandler and Jane, that they've given pretty robust answers. I think it is that volatility is going to be there, and particularly where we might see some private providers looking to exit and almost charge almost a surplus to try and claw back some funds in this interim period, whether it's the next 2-3 years until the legislation is fully embedded. Undoubtedly, we're going to see more costs to the authority in that regard. The other question, it wasn't obviously a social care related, but it was a formal social care asset in relationship to Seven View, but it's on the housing within the housing and homeless department. And we were looking at a saving of 400k this year, but it looks like a lot of that saving has been found through Welsh Government grant, although we've got in the budget item previously we've got a £557,000 earmark saving. So I just wondered if any officers are available to sort of clarify that. Is that sort of pressure initially gone because of grant funding? It feels I think that's what I'm reading.
So, John, did you want to pick up on that? Just clarifying the 400,000.
Thank you, Chair. So, I think you probably come round to the answer there within the question eventually, Councillor Pavia. So, we've benefited from in-year grant that has been able to offset that saving that hasn't been able to be achieved. That is 1 year grant. We may get further allocations. That's one of the things we don't know as yet for next year. that will bring savings from the 1st of April for next year. What it will also bring is the ability to reduce our housing benefit penalty, which is significant, as well as alongside the reductions in high cost bed and breakfast and more temporary accommodation measures. So I think that's a real positive. The timing hasn't been where we want it to be as we've gone through this year. Probably happy that we've been able to offset that through grant means, but if we'd achieved that earlier, that grant could have been used elsewhere. So it's something we need to work on. I think we've talked around maybe some of that optimism bias in the savings when bringing those together. I think that the challenge process has been quite robust this time around. Again, we've built upon that, and we're still going through that. Just yesterday we were making challenges around some of the savings that are still in there. So I think it comes back to being realistic around the delivery of those, given the resources that we have across the authority and some of the operating challenges that we're seeing. So hopefully that gives some further context to it for you.
Councillor Pavia, you can tend with that, yep. And thanks for raising it. I know it's a set of issues that you're following, and I'm sure it won't be the last time we talk about it either. Great, so I see Councillor Buckler, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the most interesting things in this committee is Jane, your points about statutory bodies sort of being completely at odds with each other, and how much it must impact on officer time. So it must be costing us a lot of time and resources for you to try and resolve these cases, and that you flagged up a real concern, which as you were saying, is Wales wide. So that was it was sort of illuminating and rather upsetting to hear. My 2 points are about rising council tax debt and reduced collection rates. There seems to be a growing trend of increased discounts, exemptions, and slower tax collection, which could be inferring that our residents are struggling already, let alone with another, increase in council tax burden. And it seems to me like a sort of red flag that all is not well in the Garden of Eden in Monmouthshire. People are really struggling with the cost of living. Can you sort of, clarify what we're doing about it, how we're tackling it, and what impact it's having on our income? Also, we mentioned that, and Councillor Callard, you made it very clear you're not dipping into reserves this year, but we have a very limited reserve cover, don't we? So what are we, and hopefully John would be able to illuminate us as well. What are we doing to try and build up our reserves? How can, we work with the Welsh Government to make sure that we're one of the, we're not the council with the least reserves. We know other councils have huge reserves which they sit on, which seems extremely uneven. So if you could, elucidate on that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Councillor Callard, you may want to respond or go straight to Jonathan.
I'll hand over to Jonathan if that's okay, Chair.
Yep, thank you. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. So I think, specifically in terms of reserves and a wider financial resilience, you're right. I think a recent Audit Wales report identified that our reserve cover as a percentage of our net revenue budget is at the lowest in Wales. and there are other authorities who, are at a vastly different end of the scale to us on that. We firstly just need to be conscious that we compare like for like. Some authorities will be in a very different place in terms of their reserve investment journey. So authorities will have put funds aside for very specific purposes, and they may very well be for localised reasons. So the context of those reserves is very important. A lot of that will be joint service arrangements, regional partnerships, and many other reasons for holding those. I guess where the more important comparator is in the kind of centrally held reserves, so that's our council fund and our specific earmarked reserves that are a tool for us to use as an authority to manage risk, manage demand variance, and to really invest to improve and promote efficiencies. Where can we go with that? Well, I think we've taken an initial step through our council tax premiums to create some resilience and investment within the issues that we're experiencing with housing within Monmouthshire. I think Councillor Callard touched upon those in the earlier item. So that's a positive step and something that will enable us to make targeted investment where it's much needed. Aside from that, I think the ability to increase our reserve cover comes very much down to our funding settlement, our budget as a whole, and ultimately our ability to generate a budget surplus, because that is essentially where reserves are generated from. We have to be mindful that we've had investment over the last 10 to 15 years from reserves, and that will have achieved, we hope, and we can demonstrate efficiencies through services and improvements in service delivery. So that's why it's very difficult to make comparisons across local authorities, but I think it's the numbers are stark. We are at the bottom of that scale in terms of reserve cover. We do need to increase our resilience on that front, because, as we've heard earlier, the net revenue budget is increasing, so we'd like that reserve cover to increase correspondingly as well. But ultimately it comes back to the funding that we see come through, and we'll work closely with Welsh Government such that they understand that dynamic in terms of our resilience and our ability to cover risks from reserves.
Thank you. And Councillor Buckler, are you content with those responses?
Thank you, Jonathan, for talking about the reserves. I sort of want to, who would like to come back on the council tax?
Sorry, you've just gone mute there.
Right, sorry, apologies. The council tax, the sort of the discounts, the sort of slow rate of collection, what effect is it having on our income? Is it having a material effect? Because it is happening, and I feel it leads to worries about people being able to afford their council tax.
Jonathan?
Thanks, Councillor Buckler, and apologies, missed the first bit of that. You're right that the level of discounts and exemptions that we are seeing is increasing. I think the important context there is that it is increasing towards an all Wales average. So, you know, those discounts and exemptions would have been very much at the low end previously on an all Wales basis. So this is something that perhaps we shouldn't be surprised by as people become more aware of the discounts and exemptions that they're able to claim. And I think the awareness campaigns that Cabinet have been running through conversations with residents has probably really borne fruit there and ensured that everyone who is eligible to a discount or exemption is taking that up. And you know, we've been careful to put that at the forefront of our messaging for the budget. The impact that has and the collectability, I think it's something we need to be mindful of. Our collection rate is still robust and high on an all Wales basis, but it's something that we've seen slow down, and it's taking longer to collect that income over time. That being said, you know, but the performance is still good on that front, and you know, it's much needed income for us as an authority. So you know, we work closely with our shared service with Torfaen, and you know, there's a vast array of services we can offer to help people who are experiencing difficulty in paying, and ultimately, you know, we've got various channels to be able to enforce that collection. But you know, I think on balance, it's we remain in a good position and a strong position going into the end of this financial year.
Thank you, Jonathan. Councillor Buckler, did you want to come back on any of that?
No, thank you. Thank you for sort of giving us a fuller picture on the council tax situation. I think it is something that worries residents, the enormity of their council tax bills. So thank you.
Yes, and indeed, I think, you know, they look at the whole council tax bill. They don't sort of break it down generally into the component parts. And at the upper end, for the first time, I think ever, every single ward will be more than £5,000, which includes the police precept as well. So, you know, it's quite an amount to be moving through. I see no more hands. I've got a couple of questions, if I may. We've referred to this in previous updates. That it reminds me somewhat of I think it was Disraeli's comment. Councillor Strong will keep me right here because he knows his history better than I do. But it may have been Disraeli, it may have been Bernard Shaw, who talked in terms, in this context I'm going to refer to in terms of numbers, being like a lamppost, more for support than illumination. And in this respect, I'm a little concerned that that's exactly what some of these numbers are doing. They're less illuminating, but they do support a particular narrative. But the really critical thing about what goes on surely in our council is the spending within our core services. And we need to keep an eye on that. So our major 3 core services, where we spend pretty well the vast majority of our taxpayers' funds that you're managing. At the last quarterly update, the forecast overspend for the year was £5.3 million. And if you look at it again now, at the end of the third quarter, the forecast deficit is £5.1 million. So it's gone down barely at all between the quarters, and that's the driving cost of our council services. This is our 3 core services. That's what drives our costs. And the reason that that you've been able to manage those costs down to a total position that is looking like it's improving is because of the application as been happening for the last 2 years of treasury and financing aspect. So applying 2.8 million of treasury and financing issues, applying a significant amount further from other resources. But the core through train that is spending the money that the council needs to manage is in those three core services, and it's barely reduced at all between the two last quarters. So the forecast now for those three core services is, as I say, 5.1 million. 3 months ago it was 5.3 million. So it's a real concern that actually that is what it continues to drive through into what we're now looking at. We were looking at earlier as the budget for next year, because we cannot constantly be looking at treasury and financing initiatives to offset and find a way to try and balance off the core overspending in our services. And I think residents will really understand that. You know, if we're just simply spending too much money, you cannot keep finding more cash down the back of the sofa to get you out of that difficulty, or refinancing or different treasury movements. Very much interested in your comments on that, because it's clearly a very significant concern. And just, secondly, on the issue of schools reserves, we did say, a couple of years ago that we thought the schools are going to be very early to be caught out by the difficulties in funding, and so it does appear to be the case. We had at the previous quarter £5.2 million deficit forecast, and it's now risen to the expectation by year end it will be 6.14, which is, as has been mentioned before, 24 of the 35 schools. And I think it's very interested to try and understand that moves across to the council's balance sheet. What impact does that have on the council's balance sheet if there is an uncertain amount of time in which the council will be carrying this level of overspend or deficit? Clearly, a concern. And just linked to that, why are the deficits, forecast deficits of King Henry School and Chepstow so much higher than Monmouth Comprehensive? Because they're much, much higher by a factor of 2 or 3 or more. And be very interested to know in terms of our comprehensive why that is the case. So those questions, if I may. Thank you. Councillor Callard, did you want to?
Yes, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the questions. On your first point about overspends within the services, you said we're spending too much money, and I would challenge that. I think this is really an issue of us correctly forecasting the demand within those services. This money is being spent to care for people who need care. It's being spent to look after people who need looking after. I work part-time in private business in a factory, and the great thing about being a private enterprise is that if you have a bad business case or something, you just don't do it. But unfortunately, in a local authority, we're not in that position. We provide care to people who need it. Now, if more people come forward needing care, then we provide that care, and we absorb the costs that come with that care. And this is the primary driver, in overspends within those services. And I think you mention it as kind of negative that we have to look elsewhere to find the money to fund this care and look after these people who need our care. But I think that's a real positive thing of what we've been able to do. We've been able to look across our services. We've been able to release funds from other areas, and we've also been supported. I know you talked about that Treasury line, but that includes grant funding from Welsh Government, which came forward, as I mentioned in my introduction, in December, an additional £1.3 million in order to support our services. So I believe that we are doing the right thing, and we're going about it doing the right way. We spoke previously about the preventative work we're doing within our services, the long-term work that's going on in the background in order to keep those services sustainable, mitigate costs where we can in order that we can provide the care that people need. That work's ongoing, and it's very important work, but it's right that we do that work. It's right that we also look at how best to fund these services. And I think when we look across our financial performance for the last year, I think it's very valid to say that we underestimated the demand within social care. That clearly happened. More demand came forwards than we expected. But we were able to meet those costs, and I'm really pleased to be able to say that we were able to meet those costs, and we were able to provide care to people who need it. So I would say I'm satisfied with that situation. We know we've got a little bit more work to do to get to year end in order to balance the books. As I mentioned, we are, within 0.75% now of balancing. I think this is, I think we're in a good place, and I think with discipline towards the end of the year, we will see it out. Your question about schools' balances on our balance sheet, it is a risk. It's something we're concerned about, and you rightly point to a couple of our comprehensive schools where they have significant overspends within their portfolios. I'm sure Will can come in and speak a bit more broadly around that, but we know those two schools have got themselves specific challenges. Namely, with King Henry, there's a lot of transitional costs with the blending of the two schools on two different sites and also moving into a new building. And, Chepstow School has got its own challenges. But we have met with those schools. We're working with them. They acknowledge that that they need to, catch their budget deficits and work towards being more financially sustainable. And I think, we are also supporting them, as I mentioned, with the additional £1 million that we're putting in our budget, which is going to go towards them. I would stay on schools' balances that because of the way their recovery plans taking impact, they are not going to catch their spending deficits within 1 year. That deficit will grow into next year before it starts to reduce, because this is a longer piece of work which requires changes within the schools which will not happen immediately, and they will take time to develop. So when we come back and we sit here in the summer or in the autumn later this year, I wouldn't be surprised to see those deficits have grown slightly as that recovery action starts to take effect, because it is a year-on-year deficit. So the deficit may get smaller, but it will still be a deficit. That's my expectation there. You had another question, Chair, which I think was in between those two, which I may have skipped over. So please remind me if I've missed anything.
Yeah, well, you partly addressed that, and thank you. It was very much really trying to understand why the specific forecast deficits for King Henry School and Chepstow as our secondary comprehensives is so much higher, or are so much higher than Monmouthshire comprehensive, and perhaps that's something that Will would be able to respond to. If I may, just on the point that you were replying, and thank you for that, and I respect the points you're making. You did say that you're proud that we are meeting those costs. Of course, it's not we in Monmouthshire County Council who's meeting those costs, it's residents who are meeting those costs. And the reason for the questions about your forecast, your budget, but if your forecasts going into the final quarter of the year are forecasting very significant overspends in the three core service areas, the very least that our residents need to know is that the budgets and the costs are being efficiently managed. So it's very much from that point of view that I think any resident would look at that and say, well, how does that work? So it's very much they who are meeting those costs, not.
Well, I mean, I suppose I say we as an administration. I also we as I'm a resident, as we all are, of Monmouthshire. But, you know, I do on a regular basis, I talk to residents, you know, about, you mentioned council tax, the cost of running services, and we talk about responding to need. This is about responding to need. And when, you know, when we have these discussions and we talk about the cost of running the local authority and the cost of providing these services, we're talking about people looking after other people. That's what we're paying for in a lot of this stuff. We're talking about teachers in front of our children in the classrooms. Like, we need to do this stuff as efficiently as we can. And I honestly believe that that's what we're doing. And we're continuing to work towards that goal. We can always get better. We know we can. And you will have seen in our budget proposals for next year a continuation of the changes that are going through the authority that Councillor Chandler and Jane Rogers spoke to earlier about how specifically in social care we're making those changes to try and make those services, you know, more financially sustainable. But, you know, you have to square this off against the context. In the last 3 years, year on year, we've had budget gaps of over £20 million. That's 10% year on year on year. Like, that's a huge challenge to overcome. And, you know, I'm proud of Monmouthshire County Council as an organisation as actually coming to where we are now, coming towards this budget in the shape that we're in, considering the scale of that challenge. So I think we deserve credit for our response to the pressure that we are seeing in social care.
Yeah, so thank you. You know, just in that context, the budget is for next year is looking at £18 million more as a total for the council. So, you know, in that context, again, residents might well be interested in that. It's obviously a very important area that, but I'm reflecting your numbers. They're not my numbers, and your numbers are saying that as we move into the final quarter, you're forecasting that the 3 core services will overspend by £5.1 million. So that's all I'm doing is feeding them and reflecting them back to you and saying, how do you explain that to residents? And I think you've given an explanation for that. So thank you. But Will, did you want to comment on the question about King Henry School and Chepstow School and why their forecast deficits would be, they look like they're being very significantly higher than Monmouth Comprehensive?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think when you look across the secondary schools, and you know, to Councillor Callard's point as well about demand, what we see coming through the door every day to school now is very different to how it was. You know, and it's a useful marker in that pre-pandemic period, and we have seen a significant change in the extent of need that is presented in school across a whole range of different facets. Interestingly, I think the 3 schools that you've cited take forward broadly similar in-year overspend positions. They're not identical, but you know, they're not a million miles apart, so they are all in excess of £500,000 in-year pressure. And I think that was really well articulated by the heads and chairs of governors last year about the pressure that we were likely to see if schools were going to continue to provide the support to children that they felt they have to. So that brings us to the carried forward position, or the brought forward position rather. Monmouth, I think in fairness, I would agree, I'd hope Nick would agree, were very effective at securing a higher level of brought forward balance. So obviously that would then reflect on why they're carrying forward a smaller deficit at the end of this year. Chepstow we're working exceptionally closely with to help them work through what has been quite a long-term deficit position. In fact, the latest reporting shows them improving their position, which I think is positive. And myself, Nikki, and HR colleagues are meeting with them again this afternoon to discuss how they can continue to have that positive impact. With regards to King Henry, I think exactly as Councillor Callard alluded to, there have been significant cost pressures with the transition from being a secondary school and Derryview into the through school. That has brought about additional costs, and you know, I couldn't not recognise the pressures of the delayed move into the new building. So that has had some pressures there. There are also some income streams which didn't come to fruition as we might have hoped they would have done. So that's had that impact there. But really pleased to say that following the last monitoring point with King Henry, they've really stepped forward and have accelerated their budget recovery position. I think the point which was alluded to on the previous item, and which is relevant to this one, is that if schools are to recover those costs and their deficit positions in a way which isn't considered, it will have an impact on the number of teachers, it will have an impact on the number of support staff who are able to support learners, it will have an impact on the breadth of the curriculum. So what we've tried to do in the conversations that myself, Councillor Khaled, Councillor Grocott and Nikki have had with the schools is to try and ensure that there's a recovery which is secured and both realistic, but actually doesn't have an immediate and detrimental impact on either the academic or support provision that exists in schools. So working with colleagues in corporate finance, we're trying to find that midpoint that allows us to hold those two things whilst making sure that schools are recovering. And Councillor Callard's point is absolutely right that we might see a deterioration again, but I think we're confident that with the additional funding coming through that we will see a positive trajectory into the kind of the short, medium term.
Thank you, Will, and I'm sure we're all extremely supportive and sympathetic to any of our schools' leaders trying to manage their budgets, which is extremely challenging. So, we wish them well with it. And it's really just to reflect back the numbers that we have in the report, which is the projected carry forward at the year end for Abergavenny, for the King Henry School and for Chepstow School is approximately 5 times the carry forward for Monmouth Comprehensive in that context. You're frowning, so it's 1.38 million, 1.388 million and 270,000. So it's of that order of magnitude, and that's why it seems like it's a fair question to ask. Okay, thank you very much for the responses and for the questions from the members. I'm going to just on both those reports quickly move the 2 reports, which are the 2 financial reports we've looked at. The recommendations are contained in the report, and they're very much for us to note and to scrutinise what's been put in front of us and to feedback to Cabinet the comments that have arisen and questions that have been asked, and that's something that will be done, as indeed it always is. And moving on to the forward work programme, which is item number 6, and just to note that I know Robert is working and Hazel are working right now on the next couple of months of scrutiny of performance and overview. Just to give you a bit of context, and you've lived through it, most of you. So we had 14 scrutiny meetings, performance and overview scrutiny meetings last year, and I think we've probably dried. We've got the well dry for March this time round. We don't look like we've got a meeting likely to be scheduled for March. So I just really want to reference that because the reports are not lining up ready for it. If that changes, if you'd be kind enough just to hold it until the end of this week in your diaries, but if that changes, we'll make a change to the diary accordingly. And I know that Robert's working on April, as we've got a number of items that we're looking to bring in there. We're also looking at item 7, which is the Council and Cabinet Work Planner, and that is, as you would expect for you to look at and be informed by. And item 8A, and first of all, the minutes of the 19th of November. And if there are any comments or corrections to those minutes, I don't see any. So move on to 8B, which is a special meeting that we had on the 3rd of December. And any corrections or additions, I see none. So we approve those, and really just that reference point again. So if you hold on to the meeting on the 11th March, just until we get to the end of this week, and we'll advise whether or not we've got any items that we're going to bring on to that. So in the meantime, I'll call the meeting to a halt. Thank you very much for everyone's attendance, and it's been a long meeting, but we've covered a lot of ground, a lot of important ground. So thank you to everyone involved in questions and the responses. It's been very helpful. Thanks again.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, everyone.